Okay. Do you want me to start, or would you prefer other people go first? Because I was
Yeah.
obviously involved in all the skill books.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and kick us off, Mark, and then we'll just kind of go around the horn here.
Okay, thanks. So obviously DevOps engineering encompasses a range of roles and skills and different things, but basically, DevOps engineers are defined in the ways that they're required to perform their different roles. So each DevOps engineer role is a combination of goals and skills. Um, the upskilling report, I think, is a good source for a form of definition. So there are human skills like collaboration, process and function skills, framework skills, I should say, functional skills, automation skills, and technology skills. So it's really, there isn't like one hard single statement definition, but I think if you look at it that way, it's a range of skills that define the DevOps engineers and the way those skills are emphasized depending on the particular job role. That's one way I'd start the conversation. So I guess the question is, what are those skills exactly that define the roles as well?
Gotcha. Evelyn, would you like to add anything or?
Yeah, happy to chime in. I think there is a tie towards the capabilities and towards their, I hate the word maturity, but there is to some extent a maturity level which organizations are starting into. And so as DevOps engineers are being brought in, not all of them have the same type of role, right? Some of them come in, they are very much heavily used and leveraged and inserted into automation tool chains. They're very much tool folks. Then if there is organizations who already are much more advanced, there's a lot more design work to some extent relative to infrastructure or something like that. And what we're seeing right now, which is quite interesting, it's almost like the DevOps engineer is, I look at it from a perspective of a tree. The trunk of the tree is the role of the DevOps engineer. But if you go up into the tree, it has different branches, and these different branches are becoming all DevOps engineering roles, but they all have different kinds of things. One is maybe more focused on a platform and platforms. One is maybe more of a coach. One is more of a leader. One is more application focused. One is starting to go in towards maybe even an SRE. I would argue, and challenge me on that. An SRE engineer is also a DevOps engineer. He or she is hired as an SRE engineer because that's to some extent the work he or she does. But in the overall perspective, does that belong into the DevOps engineering role? I think so. Thoughts? Anybody?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that the one common level that any DevOps engineer has to have is the understanding of the SDLC lifecycle of whatever they're trying to work for. They're kind of what I think of as the enabler for anything, because yes, there's different levels and skills that DevOps engineers need, and it differs whether it's someone senior or junior, and it depends if they're working on the infrastructure or on the application level or just building the CI/CD of a specific group. But all of them really need to understand everything that goes on in their software development lifecycle. No matter what their skill is, I think that's the really common ground. And they just enable the teams to do anything. They're an integral part of any Agile team, any software team. Sometimes they're the superheroes, but really they lay down the groundwork for everyone else to do their job. And I think that's also like the importance of this role.
Good point.
Yeah, I wouldn't pick up. Go ahead, sorry. Go ahead.
I wanted to kind of emphasize the fact that from a simplification perspective, I see two words, DevOps and engineer. So in my mind, DevOps is about collaboration, sharing, creating shared knowledge, and in applying engineering principles. So as you mentioned, Orit and Evelyn, that engineering principles which are traditionally kind of existing, and also we are creating new knowledge. around how we would transition into the new world where cloud containers take precedence, microservices are the new reality of our world, right? So we together are creating a new knowledge which is more skill based right now. It's not more knowledge based, it's skill which is driving this DevOps engineers. And of course, once we are into 2 to 3 years into this, I think we will have a lot of knowledge base to bank upon. And DevOps engineering skill book, which we are creating here, is one attempt to bring that skill set together as a knowledge resource.
I like that concept of the DevOps with the behavior where the engineer is the actual role. I have a question, however. I was just speaking to, and if this is a rat hole, I don't want to go down it too far, but think about DevOps in the mainframe and DevOps in SAP. Those are two topics which are a bit of an oxymoron because of what Orit said. The SDLC in mainframe is waterfall. It's not that modern way of, agile. It's not agile. However, they're starting to go down that path. And if you think about the SAP environment, which is a huge challenge, we see and hear some folks who are in the SAP environment starting to think of DevOps, but they're not necessarily having that DevOps thinking. And their SDLC is also one which is more of a waterfall, kind of the giant old thing, not old. I hope nobody from SAP is listening to. It's not old, but it's just different architecture and different design. So if you separate that, you could do the engineering on the SAP side with whatever in the mainframe and the upgrades and the changes, but the behavior from what you were saying, Garima, on that collaboration and feedback could actually apply to those areas as well. So it's no longer an oxymoron. That could make it attractive for those people to actually jump on and say, hey, we are really wanting to do that as well. Any thoughts you guys have on that?
I just wanted to extend this with the telecommunication. I come from a telecommunication background, and largely this problem exists in telecom as well. Not because of the engineering principles, but also because of the productivity and availability challenge we are dealing with, right? So telecommunication is 5 nines always, and it's very hard to look beyond that productivity availability challenge to ensure that not only DevOps engineers but the leadership is onboarded to this discussion of it's okay to have a safety quotient. It is okay to fail in certain environments, right? You don't have to over-engineer things. And of course, all this discussion makes sense because these two aspects, when we collaborate, then only we'll be able to transition into this new world where we'll adapt to new practices, new engineering goals, right? So I think it makes complete sense. It's just that for some industries, it will take a much longer time just because of the grade and the scale of that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Just to add to what all have already mentioned, two important factors which I usually look into is attitude and willingness to learn. In actually, experience and everything counts, but because there are so many aspects related to DevOps and so many tools are coming in and skills and everything which is required. In my team, it was like 2 freshers were there and 2 were having 3 to 4 years experience. Everyone was working almost in a similar fashion because they were willing to learn new things and they were having amazing attitude. I usually do not see or do not go for existing skills and everything. I try to see if there is attitude and willingness to learn, then I feel they are very good candidate for DevOps engineer.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, the CrowdChat app has launched too. If you want to record any answers via text directly in that platform, pose the first question of how the role of the DevOps engineer will change over the next 3 to 5 years. I think we've had a great conversation so far about what it is, how we define it, and what skills and other things we need to look at. How do you think it's going to change in the foreseeable future? Mark, would you like to kick us off on that question?
Okay, so obviously the role is evolving. It seems to have evolved from the time it was created, in fact. So the next 3 to 5 years is definitely going to continue to evolve. I often say that the half-life of a DevOps engineer's knowledge is like 2 years. It seems like half of the things we know today are still relevant, 2 years from now. And the other half maybe not as important, but new things come in. So all of these things are influenced mostly by the technologies and different trends. I mean, if you go back, a few years, even containers were, the thing, and then Kubernetes, and now is a lot of other new things. But fundamentally, the technologies and trends are going to affect the role over the next 3 to 5 years. There are in this. I actually wrote the vision report for the SKILbook, and there identified literally 18 different technology changes that are occurring as we speak that are likely to influence the role. So that's really going to define it. Also, other than the technologies, I think it's also going to be some of the frameworks, like Evelyn mentioned in the answer to the prior question. Things like site reliability engineering and the different principles and practices of that influencing the way DevOps engineering works. I do agree with some of the prior comments that there's definitely a lot of overlap between DevOps, as it was defined as Dev, and also Ops, but really the emphasis in a lot of the information that's published is continuous delivery, getting changes to delivery, whereas site reliability engineering kind of approaches the problem from the other end. How do you get the wisdom of production after delivery back upstream from right to left up the value stream? So those types of things are going to influence the role of the DevOps engineer. Some of those things will become part of the DevOps engineer and the roles for SREs and DevOps. And of course, some of the other frameworks like DevSecOps are all converging to, I think, some kind of maybe unified engineer. And maybe that will end up being the DevOps engineer. I'm not so sure, but definitely the roles of the DevOps engineers are going to be evolving in that direction. Yeah.
Great. Dave, I don't know if we've heard from you yet. If you'd like to chime in on that question as well. Otherwise, we'll just kind of keep going around the horn real quick, and I will pose the next question as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm in motion, so trying to listen at the same time.
Yeah, no worries.
But yeah, very much like Mike or Mark. I'm sorry. My background comes from very divergent between public and private, and looking at those two sectors and seeing how the engineering works and understanding how organizations function, I guess, is a reasonable statement. If you look at it on one side, is say the public side, the hierarchy of an organization very much dictates how people work, where they can work. And then when you think about it in terms of funding and who controls what funding, right, that also plays a factor. So when you talk about DevOps engineering, it's very much a top-down vision of enablement, but then the execution, on the lower end organically is something that has to manifest itself over time. And then like Mark is saying, from a SRE role, when you start to think about it at large, highly regulated organizations, sometimes there's a big gap. And, for instance, especially in the public sector, sometimes those communication lines just not really there. So trying to formulate that, getting that information from right to left is a challenge. But nonetheless, there is a path forward. It's just being enabled to actually go do it. And then the skill sets, very much in line with the SKILbook, is trying to find that small organic team that is able to kind of move through, some of the brownfield, some of the cultural challenges to actually go and get some of that work done.
Very good.
Any
other thoughts before we move on to the next question? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just something to add to what you were just saying. I do think the crisis we're in and the COVID situation has actually put an incredible bright spotlight on the ops side. Let me just say that with care and with caution, because the spotlight has always been on dev, right? Because they're the famous folks. But on the ops side, and I am an ops person, we've always kind of been in the blue collar workers trying to make things happen and just go away. Now, while we're in this crisis, the light really at the executive level, I've heard a lot of conversations where people are saying, we have to operate. This is all about operation. This is about excellence. This is about speed. This is about quality all at the same time. And when I pushed back to them and said, yes, but how do you actually, those things are DevOps thinking. Do you actually have a different way of working? Just what Garima was saying. And they were like, no, but we're immediately going down that path and are starting to figure out how to break down those silos because they inhibit us for the speed we need to in the velocity, which is the same for operating in this crisis. So I actually think that 2021, when we look back and beyond, just like with the digital services and the turnarounds and the speed people have done in that, I think DevOps is going to get a real good kick in the butt, to be really brutally honest, for acceleration and adoption, because there is this bright light on, hey, how are you operating and how are you actually delivering so that we can actually sustain or at least not go out of business.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point there, Evelyn, too, and it kind of leads into our next question, which is, what are the most important performance measures for DevOps engineering appraisals? So, you really talked about the acceleration, the adoption of these things, but it's really, what are those measures that we care most about when we're talking about these practices? Orit or Garima, do you want to kick us off on that one?
So I think that the industry standard today is DORA 4. So those metrics are really measuring our efficiency and the stability of the DevOps processes. We're checking, deployment frequency, mean time for changes, restore time, how often we recover from incidents. Those are really the core metrics that you need to know in order to find bottlenecks and to see how the entire process can improve over time. On top of DORA 4, there are also other really interesting metrics that people can look at, but haven't been adopted as the standard. So you can think about cost. The problem with DevOps is that it's not like you're looking at something tangible that you're selling. So you can't really measure it by dollars. What you can do is kind of interpret the dollars that you would have been making. So you can think about how we improved our velocity, like Evelyn said, and then multiply that by developer time, and you get hard cash. You get the dollar signs to see how much money you really saved, or look at how you improved your quality and see how many customers would have left you had you not had high quality products. And then you can kind of translate that into money if you're more comfortable with, trying those kind of financial metrics. So there's really interesting ways to measure these processes.
And I would extend this thought because this is excellent, Orit, because you actually mentioned some tangible matrices which we can use as of today. I also want to extend this thought about measuring behaviors before measuring results. So how do you measure behavior in an organization which is DevOps oriented? So some of the potential opportunities which you can start thinking about is, what is your capacity to innovate? How do you measure that? What kind of journey you're doing for your employees to empower others, not to empower yourself only? Also, how do you rethink about opportunities? What kind of experimentation platforms you have created in an organization where these people can come and experiment and do these kind of chaos engineering, game days? All these kind of things are really relevant, because if you want to look at the second way and the third way of DevOps, which is feedback and experimentation, that's how you would progress at the next steps.
Interesting.
So I have some comments as well. I agree with Laura that, at the business level, at least the DORA metrics seem to be the best, best accepted anyway, metrics for measuring the performance of DevOps itself, which of course can translate to the performance of engineers and therefore their appraisals. When you get down to individual DevOps teams, there are some tenets that I think we all know, the comms model, and there's a whole set of metrics, a long list of them. Definitely wouldn't want to apply them all to anyone in DevOps engineer, but that's a source of some metrics to help, depending on what's important for the individual role, culture, automation, lean measurement, sharing metrics could be applied at the individual level, but probably most importantly is, traditional appraisals. You want to appraise people based on their roles that they're expected to perform. And in this case, the list of tasks and responsibilities for the particular DevOps engineer will still apply in terms of their appraisals. But it should be done in the context of, the DevOps tenets, as well as the overall business, performance measures. So when defining those appraisal, forms or questions or ratings, I think that's something you should keep all of that in mind, in my opinion.
It would be interesting, Mark, with what you just said, to talk to an HR manager of, actually, I'm going to take a note. I'm going to speak to a CTO of as part of upskilling of a large software company. I want to know how he and his HR partner measure the performance of the DevOps engineer, because the appraisal systems, at least those the ones I'm familiar with, and those I've seen, they don't really take that into consideration. That's a completely different way of thinking as an HR person. When you go and put together, appraising systems and performance measurements for the next level of raise you're getting from where you are today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I must admit I have a bit of a controversial view of the whole thing, because in my own experience over the years is that appraisals themselves are actually less important than the goal setting. If you set the goals particularly well, then the appraisal almost takes care of itself. But unfortunately, too many companies seem to spend more time on the appraisals, of trying to evaluate what wasn't really well defined, instead of the opposite, which is spend more time on the objectives, and then it's a lot easier to evaluate. But having said that, it is important to have appraisals. Yeah.
You mentioned HR, Evelyn, and that kind of leads into another question as well, which is, what are those primary factors that justify hiring and developing DevOps engineer talent? There's this, obviously there's many factors, but I know there's also a large scale investment going on with our companies on hiring and developing this talent, nurturing it. Anyone, you have any initial thoughts, Mitesh or Dave, initial reactions on the factors of justifying hiring and developing these roles?
Yeah, so more or less knowledge across the SDLC tool chains, different pipelines, knowledge about what kind of tools are utilized in what kind of activities across end-to-end automation. So those are very basic requirements when you try to hire DevOps engineers. And we usually look for I had a discussion with Mark one day that it is impossible to have a DevOps engineer according to the job description given, because they provide a JD which even Superman or Spider-Man cannot even fulfill. That is the JD which is given. I was given a JD to take an interview, and I told the person who gave me that JD that I don't have this kind of credentials. I don't have knowledge on this kind of tools. What you have mentioned, almost 40 to 50 tools were mentioned in that particular JD. So people look for something completely different in DevOps engineers, but usually if the person is having knowledge about latest trends and different tool stacks and those and approach, so ultimately what kind of approach you are having. So for example, when I was having one interview with customer, and he asked me a simple question that we want to implement IBM's culture or IBM's DevOps culture into our culture, or let's say Netflix culture into our organization culture. Fortunately, I read a lot of books and articles and everything, and I said that is not possible because each organization has different culture. So that was a catch for me. For a consulting assignments, that was a catch. That if you say yes, we will be able to do, then you are not a right person to do that job. So those kind of small things we should look look while hiring DevOps engineers.
That's a really good point. When you were talking, I couldn't help but relate what you were saying to actually one of my sons who actually got a psychology degree in university. He had an aptitude for technology. He built computers as a little projects and so on, but he got a psychology degree. And then he was hired as a sysadmin, soon became knowledgeable about system administration and automation of that. He became a DevOps engineer, and then he became the DevOps engineer manager. Then he became a site reliability engineer, and just recently he got promoted to being an SRE manager. So his skill base was not technology specifically; it was his ability to learn, because there's so many things expected from the DevOps engineering role and related roles like SRE. You can't possibly know it all day one. And what you know, like I said before, the half-life of that knowledge is probably 2 years. So the most important thing to look for is the ability and aptitude and attitude to learn and to be, interested in the role and to grow it. And in addition to that, my son's psychology degree helped him a lot with the human skill side of it. So it's not just enough to have those technology skills, but to really, leverage human skills for collaboration and communicating with other teams, because nobody really knows it all, right? So collaboration is critical,
Yeah, I also wanted to say something here, which is in line with what has already been said, but it's also different in one way. I would like to reflect that, good DevOps engineers are not hired. They are made. The environment you are putting them, the people in, is really important. And the second thing which we should also address is that a lot of people think that all the DevOps people in the world are coders and developers. I would like to reflect that that's not true, and that's not the case. So think about like broader perspectives around and apply through theory of constraints for your organization. What are those limiting factors which are hindering you from accelerating in an organization, which is hindering you from getting the right feedback and helping you to increase the culture of innovation or capacity of innovation. And that's where you will find the right mix of people.
Very interesting. It kind of you talk about how maybe the roles or responsibilities of a DevOps engineer, it is maybe different from other roles, within the enterprise or within an organization. So to follow up on what you said, Garima, and maybe Evelyn, we can kick this question off with you. What are some key responsibilities that distinguish between DevOps engineers and other roles like developers or sysadmins or agile coaches?
Yeah, to pick up where Garima left, I think I love that statement. They're not, DevOps engineers are not hired, they're made. I think those folks have to have, to some extent, an entrepreneurial spirit, almost like a trailblazers, pioneers. I don't like the word hero, even so, because sometimes that is associated with the connotation that I don't want to transfer my knowledge and I don't want to work with others. I'm just the hero because I can do it all. I rather like to call it the trailblazer, or the leader, the coach, the partner. And I think the responsibilities, even so, from an engineering perspective, from the automation work, from the analysis, for understanding processes, from all of that, can be sometimes the same to when I was a sysadmin way back on the HP 3000 doing JCL work. I did some cool thing, but I wasn't pioneering something new. I wasn't pioneering new ways of working. I wasn't going to the developers and starting to do some things. I wasn't bridging gaps. I wasn't tearing down silos. So Mark, to your son having that psychology degree, I think that that capability of understanding how humans work and all of that is certainly very distinguishing for the DevOps engineer, and with it, the responsibility to really aim at that cultural breakdown. And I think that, not saying, this is really tough to say, because that would mean that sysadmins don't have cultural skills. Well, of course they do. But because it is so new and they have to trailblaze, if that's even a word, then that requires a lot more tenacity, a lot of, being beaten down and standing up and those kinds of things. So my daughter is a psychologist major. Maybe there is a chance that she become an SRE leader or something. I have to suggest that to her.
As an engineering manager, even let alone as a manager overseeing some DevOps groups, when in my corporate days, I used to say, I wish I had, 5 cents for every time I had to deal with a person problem, because the technical problems were the easy part. It was getting everybody collaborating, working together, sharing the same goals. Once you got everybody on the same page and agreeing on what they're trying to do, then you pretty much, the job was to get out of the way, because everybody knew what to do. Mm-hmm. And the technical part was generally the easy part. You can it was getting the people aligned and getting them all agreeing on what to do. That was the hardest part, and that's certainly true with DevOps and SRE. Is getting alignment, which is very much a people problem. No matter how good your tools are, or your processes, if people aren't in agreement of which way they're going to use those tools and processes to go in different directions. You're not going to get there. So yeah, definitely, absolutely.
Ulrich, you made an interesting point about being enablers.
Yeah. So I think that something very unique to DevOps engineers is that they're enablers. They really have their hands in every pie, and the really hard part about the job is that when everything goes well, no one notices them because things just work. But when something goes wrong, the entire company, like the production is down, everyone's on their feet. And that's kind of, the bummer part of being a DevOps engineer, is like you have a lot on your shoulders.
That's a really interesting point. I literally have experienced that when I was an engineering manager, again, multiple times, where, when it finally came around to that time of the year for appraisals, I'd put forward, my top person, and everybody said, well, we don't even know who this person is. I said, yeah, that's the reason he's the top person, because he did such a good job. If he didn't do his job well, you would know who he is, because everything would have been falling apart. And I always had a challenge on my hand to defend that position. But you're exactly right. If if the DevOps engineer is doing his job well, you almost don't know they're there.
I managed a DevOps team in my previous company, and really, when everything was smooth, like no one talked to me in the halls, and when something would go wrong, my phone would just explode, and it was just really, really tense. Kept saying this is like the most unrewarding job, because everyone's so mad at you, and when things go wrong, and every day it's like nothing, you don't exist, everything's fine, but yeah, I think it's a lot of responsibility on their shoulders. They touch so many aspects in the company. They have to have a really good system-wide view. The DevOps lifecycle is both downstream and upstream, so they have to have a really good view of what's coming next, what came before them. And so it really is a unique position. It kind of touches on everything in the organization.
Yeah, and I think you made an excellent point. I wish I could believe that I was in an organization where nobody was hitting on us, right? But I come from a background, I struggled my way through various productivity challenges in large enterprises. And often when we are part of the IT system, the challenges which we have is like IT being too slow, or it's too fragile, it breaks. Every problem becomes an IT problem, right? At the end of the day. So this is the kind of environment you would get in if you're kind of working in a traditional legacy big enterprise. Now, what kind of skill set you would require as part of a DevOps engineering background? If you want to get into this, these are the day-to-day issues which we handle. Every day we have a P1 or a P2, and we are kind of bogged down with this challenge of being too slow, IT being the slowest. So what skill set would be required is critical problem solving, thinking out of the box, trying to kind of break down these big problems. IT being too slow is a very abstract problem. So now how you break this down and you take it in incremental steps. And that is also one of the roles or one of the responsibility which the DevOps engineer would have. So I would like to see more people in my team who can have a more collaborative approach, more critical thinking around these critical business problems which we have lived from, let's say, past, and also bring new knowledge, create new knowledge. So that's another skill set which would be really required for the next generation.
Awesome. Excellent. Just wanted to get one more question into the crowd chat as we continue the conversation. Are there any specific pitfalls or weaknesses that organizations should avoid when they're working to improve their DevOps engineering capabilities? So I think you just had some good points on what they need to enable, from an organizational standpoint. Mark, do you want to maybe take that question first?
Yeah, so this is one that's near and dear to my heart because I have, in my consulting business, seen so many failed DevOps projects. And maybe that's because, they don't bother to call a consultant unless they have some reason to do so because they've already tried themselves. But, the biggest problem is, first of all, recognizing that there's a lot of complexities in DevOps. And you can easily get off on a tangent by doing all the wrong things. Maybe you're doing the right things, but they're doing the wrong things correctly. You can invest a lot of time in doing the wrong things correctly and then end up with, not getting to your goal. So the first thing is, not really making sure that the DevOps team knows what your business goals are. If they don't, then how can you expect them to be aligned with those goals? I've seen DevOps engineers raked over the coals for, doing things that are like, hey, this is not what we're trying to do right now. Okay, I wish somebody had told me that. So making sure that the DevOps engineers do know what the business goals are, and then, allowing them to be participating in the application strategy. They're not just, tool guys in the background. They need to be people that are involved in the strategic, and understand the strategy for the product or the service that they're serving. So that's another big weakness or pitfall by thinking they're just going to go off and build tools without really knowing what the strategy is. And then once they know, what the strategy and the business goals are, then, do support them with training and making sure that they have the right, latitude and, empowerment to really, succeed for those particular directions and, the budget to do so. So these are just some examples that, definitely are indicative. They're pitfalls that I notice, treating the DevOps engineers kind of the back room guy or the back room person, and not getting them involved in the strategic level when the role is so important to the strategy.
Good point. Anybody else want to call it a potential pitfall or a weakness just to be, cognizant?
So I think one of the pitfalls that I've seen is being attracted to every new shiny new technology and tool out there and trying to bring everything in. At the beginning, it sounds really great because this new technology solves a problem or multiple problems. But when you think about the individuals that later need to integrate the tools or learn about the tool, like even a specific developer that now needs to know, this is the tool for CI, this is the tool for this. Now I have to do some gated check-in and another tool, and now I have to do something in Kubernetes. Oh wait, now I'm going to do it in Helm, or no, there's a new. It's just too much to learn for one little person, and it's also really hard to onboard. It's hard to have a really good vision when you just get attracted to everything and you keep changing the process. Change is good, but you don't have to do it every time. It has to serve a purpose. So I think that's a pitfall that should be avoided.
Yeah, and I also wanted to mention one more thing. Coming from a large enterprise background, thinking about complexity before the value. I've seen a lot of people kind of, jumping onto the DevOps wagon and doing huge assessments on how to onboard to CI/CD without actually having agile thinking in the organization, without even thinking about what is the business question they have at hand. So I think we need to be very careful about how to build incremental value through DevOps engineering. And that's something which I see a lot of big enterprises kind of get lost in that process of transition.
Excellent points. Yeah.
The one thing I would add to that one is, I mean, communication, transparency, and empathy, right? And I really think that also comes down to the type of organization that plays directly into the culture of an organization and the approach that you take for implementing, whether you're doing, you're merging the dev and ops teams, you're creating some cross-collaborative team, or you're putting a platform in place that is enabling kind of that bridge between dev and ops, right? So it really comes down to the size of the organization, the approach that you're taking, but being honest about it, right? Being honest with your own team, as well as the organization, just acknowledging that, failure isn't really a failure. It's just an unprompted reinvestment in your organization. You found something new, you found a problem. It's being honest about, okay, we found the issue. Now, how do we resolve it? How do we prevent it from happening again? So that kind of brings that SRE piece back into play as well. And you're always looking at that continuously. And then the transparency piece is not working on things in a vacuum. Throw it out there. Let everybody know what you're doing. You're going to get criticism, at least in my opinion, right? Because every time we've done it, they're like, oh, you can never do that. It'll never work. Well, why? Have you tried? Have you measured it? How do you know? You don't really know until you go and try it. And then that comes back to the failure piece and the transparency and just being honest about the outcomes, the approach. And then, even if you have to put some sort of, time gap against it to say, hey, okay, we'll give it a fair shake for some amount of time. And if we don't reap the rewards, we'll pivot. Having the ability to be honest about, okay, this isn't working. And being empathetic with the others, right? Understand, open, listening. When you're working with other teams and you're doing the coordination, for instance, if you have a DevOps platform, you're going to have people on the right that are saying, hey, this thing's not giving me the output that I'm expecting. Or on the dev side, they're saying, I need this new thing, which goes into, do you really need this new thing? Or are we not using what we already have effectively? Are we not sharing? It's the transparency piece.
Excellent points. Yeah.
Points. Yeah, excellent points. I know we're a few minutes over our allotted time, but wanted to see if there's any other comments anybody wanted to make. I have one more fun question too, if people have a few more minutes to stick around. Anything else to add, Evelyn, Orit, Mitesh, Mark? Anything? Okay.
Nothing from my side.
Okay. Well, let's have one more question and wrap this up. And again, we will be redistributing these questions, and this is recorded, this video, so we'll be referencing back to this and continuing the conversations with other folks in the ambassador program as well. But one more question, which is kind of an interesting one to me, is what animal best illustrates the role of a DevOps engineer?
I would say it's an octopus.
Yeah, I was thinking the same. I couldn't think of the name of the animal. Yes, it's an octopus. I agree.
So I was going to go with octopus. I thought about that, but the one problem with the octopus, they are not social animals.
Ah.
So that's why I discounted octopus, and I ended up with a dolphin, because they do accomplish things through social, but they're also very smart, nimble, and they're clever about how they're constantly trying to challenge their environment and learn, but they're very social. So that's the reason I chose dolphin.
Cool. Dave, Mitesh, any other thoughts?
I'm lost. I'm not getting the answer.
That's fair. That's a fair response. Awesome.
That one threw me too. I wasn't ready for that one, but if I had to throw something out just off the top of it, I don't know, maybe go with eagle, right? They got great eyesight, freedom to fly. They see an opportunity. you know, they try to go after it.
Awesome.
It goes back to that entrepreneurial spirit.
Mhm,
Yeah,
mhm.
Good one.
definitely. Yeah. Excellent. Great. Well, I really appreciate all of you taking the time and having the chat today. We're going to, like I said, this is content that's really going to be helpful for the SKILbook that's coming up, and obviously trying to spread the word around the DevOps engineer role, what it is, how people can enable it, and other things for people to keep in consideration as we head into the future. So,
Thanks, Jeremy. That's
yeah.
great.
Any other closing thoughts or points anybody wants to make before we close off for today?
Yeah, just shout out to all of you animals out there in whatever shape you are in. You guys are all very, very cool people. Love working with you. And thank you, Jeremy, for organizing it and everybody else joining us and joining brains together. That's fun.
Yeah, this is a great conversation. I'm looking forward to seeing the book published or posted. Really, really great. This is, I've learned a lot from this panel. So thank you.
Feeling is mutual. Absolutely.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Have
Same here.
a wonderful
Thank
rest
you.
of your day. And I'll follow up here either later today or tomorrow with some additional thoughts and actions. And but otherwise, we're good to go. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care,
Thank
folks.
you.